Welcome to another tutorial on the anterior pituitary. In this tutorial we'll be discussing the production of prolactin, and prolactin functions to produce milk in the mammary tissues. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a flow diagram to consider how the hypothalamus, pituitary, and mammary tissues respond to prolactin. We'll also look at the effects of prolactin on the ovary as it relates to the female system. We'll then address whether prolactin is protein or lipid based, as that indicates how it'll function. And then we'll look at the hypo and hypersecretions of prolactin. Great. So the first thing we're going to do is look at an illustration of how we are producing prolactin in the body. We are going to start with the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is directly connected to the pituitary, and in this case we're going to be looking at the anterior pituitary. There are a couple of things that trigger the release of prolactin. The first is suckling. So upon stimulation of the breast tissue, we are going to signal or stimulate the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus in response will begin secretion of prolactin releasing hormone, or PRH. PRH is an inotropic hormone that is produced by the hypothalamus. And secretion of prolactin releasing hormone causes the anterior pituitary to release prolactin. So prolactin is released from the anterior pituitary into circulation. And in circulation, it's going to have an effect on two tissues. This means that there are receptors embedded in two tissues that will be capable of responding to prolactin when it adheres to the receptor. The first, and the one that you are probably already anticipating, is that of the mammary glands. So in my illustration, I like to draw these ducts, or these glands, that would be associated and inside the breast tissue. And so this would be the breast and then the nipple that is associated. So the prolactin is stimulating the glands here to increase their production of milk. So the net result is increased milk production. Now, in addition to milk production, we also find that prolactin has an effect on the ovaries. So I like to draw the ovary as this sort of ovule-shaped structure with a fallopian tube off to the side. And I'll label it for you so that you know what my picture represents. Now, when prolactin hits the ovary is going to begin secretion of inhibin. Inhibin is a protein-based hormone that we also saw in the male. So when the testes started secreting testosterone, testosterone acted as a paracrine signal to cause the testes to release inhibin. And inhibin then inhibited or turned off the secretion of the sex hormones. This is something that we see in the case of prolactin as well. So when inhibin is secreted, it is going to have an effect on the hypothalamus, and it's going to have a negative effect. So it's going to turn things off. So when inhibin is circulating in the female, the hypothalamus produces prolactin inhibiting hormone. But interestingly enough, it also produces gonadotropin inhibiting hormone. So this is the link that many people are looking for when they hear that a lactating female doesn't cycle like a normal female. So when a female is lactating, she's going to produce inhibin, and the inhibin is going to prevent the release of any other of the gonadotropic hormones. This is going to prevent luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone from being released. And when follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are low, then we don't see maturation of new cells, new follicles in the ovary. So this is a way for the body to try to control the birth rate, to help decrease the number of offspring that a female might have, so that as long as she's lactating, she can invest all of her energy and resources into that child. Now, there are some cultures where this system works very well. For example, this is something that works very well in the Native American population. But those of a European descent see that this system really breaks down. So a female who depends on lactation as a form of birth control often can be surprised when she does end up pregnant a fair bit earlier than she thought she would be. Now, there's a few more aspects here that I want to talk about. Not only does suckling promote prolactin-releasing hormone, but we find that when we have high doses of estrogens, that the high doses of estrogens can also cause prolactin-releasing hormone. Now, estrogens may be high in females. There are certainly females out there that lactate even though they're not pregnant and have never had a child. But in addition, this is the correlation to males that lactate. So it might surprise you, yeah, males can have lactation. And that lactation is something that we typically see in males that are of poor body condition. This link was first identified in prisoner of wars. So people who were prisoners of war were often starved, and that meant that across the board they had fewer proteins and fewer lipids. So as the nutritional aspects of these individuals changed, they stopped producing hormones because the hormones are made from proteins, they're made from lipids. When these prisoners of war were rescued and brought back to society and they began consuming foods, the very first hormone that got to be produced, the very first sex hormone that gets to be produced is estrogens. And so these males would find that they would go through a brief period of lactation until the body would pick up its production of testosterone and essentially shut this system down. So if you're interested in more information on this, you might be interested in reading Jared Diamond's book, Why Sex is Fun. Okay, now back to my female, we've got one more thing to talk about. Now, pregnancy follows this kind of step-by-step process. So we're going to create this sort of line to consider what happens in the female that's pregnant. So when I have a pregnant female, over the course of the pregnancy, whether via the corpus luteum in the ovary or placental production, I'm going to increase the amounts of circulating progesterone. And when I have elevated amounts of progesterone, I see a paracrine signal. So the progesterone levels are going to be promoting the release of inhibin by the ovary, and that's then going to inhibit the release of prolactin. Now, during a pregnancy, a female wants to start producing milk in the third trimester, but we don't want to have that milk being ejected. So as progesterone levels, I inhibit the amount of prolactin that is released. Then, mid-stage from my pregnant female, or I guess at the end of pregnancy, she should go through something called parturition. Labor is the layman's term. So parturition is the process by which she's going to deliver her baby and begin then feeding that offspring. So once labor occurs, we're going to see the progesterone levels fall. And if progesterone levels fall, then we're no longer secreting inhibin. And that will allow the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary to begin secreting more prolactin to affect the breast tissue and increase the production of milk. True milk production, not colostrum, but actual milk, typically doesn't begin in a female until 1 to 2 days after delivery. And this is directly related to changes in the amounts of prolactin. This one's a pretty quick slide. Turns out that prolactin is a protein-based hormone, so it has a relatively short half-life. It triggers a response in the mammillary tissue of the breast, and then quickly is metabolized out of the body. Now, the mammillary tissue itself is going to be looking for surges in prolactin, and we get surges of prolactin every time the baby nurses. So as the baby nurses, this causes prolactin to be released, and once prolactin is released, we get the secretion of the byproducts which become milk. So this allows the breast tissue to fill up with milk between nursing. Lastly, we have to consider what happens when we have a hyposecretion or a hypersecretion. Obviously, a hyposecretion means we don't produce any milk. If we go even a very short time period without suckling, this is enough to completely turn off the lactation process. So females need to be suckled by their offspring at least daily, if not more often, in order to maintain a supply. If a female goes 2 to 3 days without suckling, that's enough to dry up the female. Hypersecretion, if there really is such a thing, just creates more milk production. I don't know that there's ever been a female that's produced too much milk, because the production of milk has to go one-on-one with the expulsion of milk, and that's going to be a part of the oxytocin hormone. This completes the tutorial on prolactin.